So, you're in the market for a low-profile keyboard from one of the top manufacturers in gaming peripherals, but at a glance, it seems that the only real difference between these is that one has more buttons than the other. Well, don't worry, my name is Link with Gamer Gear, and I've got you covered. I'll be going over the top 5 differences between the Razer DeathStalker V2 Pro and the Logitech G915, and if by the end of the video you felt I did a good job explaining the differences, how about you leave a like, deal? The absolute biggest difference between these keyboards is their switches. The Logitech G915 has low-profile mechanical switches that comes in 3 varieties: a tactile version for a nice little bump on the way down, a clicky version for that crisp audible click, and the far superior linear versions that give you that smooth press all the way through. Heck, don't get mad at me for telling the truth, but leave your comments below and let me know why I'm wrong. Each of these keys have an actuation distance of 1.5 millimeters with an average force of 50 grams for actuation. Now, Razer, being the new kids on the block, kick things up a notch by offering optical switches instead of those traditional mechanical ones. Already, you're going to get a more dependable switch with the opticals lasting about an average of 40% longer than the mechanical switches, and that's because you have less parts to worry about that could break down. They made them in 2 versions: a clicky, which has a 1.5 millimeter actuation height with 50 grams of force, which are the same as Logitech's, but they also packed the superior linear versions. Oh, you know the deal. Leave your complaints in the comments below. With 1.2 millimeter actuation point and only 45 grams of actuation force, making these Razer's most responsive switches to date. Now, I hear you. It's only a 0.1 millimeter of difference, and in the real world, that probably doesn't mean too much, but it is an added spec that the Razer does have over the G915 on top of already having superior optical switches. Now, I'm not going to pretend it's all rainbows and sunshines and butterflies over in the Razer side, because one of the downsides with these switches is they feel a little mushier when they bottom out. That actually has to do with the fact that they have some pretty good dampeners on here to minimize the sound and that clank when you reach the end, but for some users, they actually do like that clank, and it gives them a more responsive feel when they reach the bottom. So that's something that you're going to get with the G915 that you won't have with the Razer. So in the end of the day, that's going to be a matter of preference. For our second difference, we're going to keep things close to the switches, and we're going to talk about the keys themselves. Both have low profile keys, which means you have a shorter keystroke than traditional keyboards, but that also means you're going to have less options to replace them because of how small the market is for those low profile keycaps. But it's even worse on the Logitech side because they don't use the standard connector compared to the DeathStalker V2 Pro, which does. Both of these keyboards have ABS keycaps, which means that they're going to attract some of those oils from your finger and start getting shiny over time. When it comes to the G915, which has been in the market for a while already, there's already a lot of reports about these keys wearing out and people having nightmares having to try to replace them. And on top of that, there's also a lot of horror stories with the G915 where people remove their keycaps in order to clean out the keys and end up breaking them because of how the way that they clip on instead of sliding on with something like the Razers. Now, Razer claims that they have ultra durable coating on laser edge keycaps, which are designed to be tougher than double shot ABS keycaps, but only time will tell if this claim holds up. But for now, that's a big win for Razer in my book. Both of these keyboards are wireless, which means there's a battery to worry about. Both of them have nice and bright lights on their full keyboards, and with the G915 getting 30 hours at max brightness, shining out over the DeathStalker V2 at 26.1 hours. Shining out. Get it? Get it? No? Yeah. I thought it was cool. In my opinion, when it comes between these two keyboards, you'll probably want to keep those lights nice and bright on the DeathStalker V2 Pro, and that's because of the crazy amount of chroma light options that are one of the crowning features for Razer with all of their peripherals put together. In my opinion, between these two keyboards, you're probably going to end up wanting to have the brighter lights on the DeathStalker V2 Pro, and that's because of the crazy amount of light options that Razer is known for with Razer Chroma. So the fact that this gets less battery life definitely is a bummer. Granted, these do have optical switches, so it's going to have more battery draw, so it's going to be a toss-up on what's more important for you. Now, the most apparent difference between these two keyboards is the key configuration. The G915's design philosophy is to just put everything ready at the go, while the DeathStalker V2 goes for that minimalistic approach. The G915 lays out 5 macro keys and 3 macro record keys and a separate key for macro recording, and it has separate buttons for switching between wireless 2.4 GHz connection and Bluetooth, and a separate game mode and a separate brightness key. Razer says forget all that mess, and we're going to give you that nice and tight aesthetic with all the keys required to be a full keyboard. The way Razer gets away with this is by moving the buttons to swap between the 2.4 GHz and Bluetooth to the back side, along with giving you 3 additional buttons to quickly select which Bluetooth device you're going to be connecting to. And for the rest of the buttons, such as game mode and brightness, they're tucked away behind pressing a function key in order to access them. I personally wish that Razer adapted having a button instead of a switch to swap between the 2.4 GHz and Bluetooth like Logitech does, because I typically leave my keyboard on anyway. So having a button to just swap between the two of them is just easier, but I'm gonna have to say, I understand that's a me problem. Now, the lack of dedicated macro keys leads me to my 5th and final difference for this list, and that's how each keyboard deals with macros. The inclusion of, or lack thereof, specific macro keys will be a major factor of choice for many, but don't be mistaken. Just because Razer doesn't have macro face keys doesn't mean it doesn't have macro keys. It's just more customized. Now, for constant users of macros where having those dedicated macro keys are basically a non-negotiable, well, thank you for watching the video. Please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel, because at this point, this video is done for you. I mean, you gotta give credit to Logitech for understanding there are gamers like that, so having all those keys ready at the go with 3 different profiles just at a switch notice is absolutely awesome for gamers that need macros. But hold on, that doesn't mean that Razer doesn't have a clever way of dealing with macros. Instead of giving you dedicated keys, they said screw it. Any key can be a macro. Logitech locks you down in having any macros that you want to create to have them only on those 5 macro keys, while Razer gives you the flexibility that if you want that whole F key row to be macros, you can do it. You want to do all the 10 keys, you can do it. Any key on your keyboard is replaceable to be a macro, so it's up to you how you want to do it. With that said though, there is a negative when it comes to macros on the Razer. When you're trying to record macros on the fly with the DeathStalker V2 Pro, what happens is if you try to assign the escape key within your macros, it's actually going to stop recording it, where if you do it on the G915, you can actually assign the escape key as your whole macro list. So for some situations where you have to macro in that escape key, the G915 is going to be better. Now, that's not to say you can't use escape key within your macros. That's only when you're recording on the fly. If you use their software, you're going to be able to do any option on there. But again, that is a little bit of a negative when it comes to the Razer. I personally find that minimalistic approach from Razer's DeathStalker V2 Pro with those sweet optical switches being very appealing. But ultimately, I stuck with Logitech's G915 because it fits my needs so much better. With my 2 PC streaming setup, having those buttons just there ready to go on the G915 makes it so much nicer than having to use the switch back and forth. So for somebody like me, this one makes a lot more sense. But if it had something a little bit different, I probably would have ended up with the DeathStalker because it is a fantastic keyboard. So, which one's more appealing to you? Let me know in the comments below, and I hope this video helped you make your buying decision. And if it did, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel for future content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.